But this week, we have a special guest. Our special guest, as you heard a little bit earlier, Nick Green of Echo Excel, all the way from Colombia, by way of Australia, I believe. So, Nick, welcome to the show. Would you mind starting off just telling everybody a little bit about your Excel background, your background in general?
Yeah, sure, Rick. Yeah, so I got introduced to Excel when I fell into supply chain industry after university. I didn't learn much Excel studying business at university, which is a bit funny because I use it probably 50% of my work, or I have since. Yeah, so supply chain is quite a chaotic industry, so chaos just means people tend to use Excel a lot. So I was really forced to self-learn. I wish probably I'd studied more formally for something like VBA, or Visual Basic. That's something that yeah, it would have saved me a lot of headache. It's something you can, if you don't have the structure for that right, you pay for it later. Yeah, so that's my background basically.
Could you explain a little bit about the name Echo Excel? Kind of where did that come from, and what is your site?
Sure.
Where did that name come from?
Sure. So Echo Excel is a forecasting tool. So when I think of forecasting, I thought of I tend to think of echoes because you know, the further away you look, the more the softer your signal your certainty is. Much like an echo, I suppose. And it was short. um, yeah, so it's a forecasting tool. There is a lot of forecasting software I've used. I've been a demand planner, so that was the main purpose of my job in the past, and I felt those tools are really built for or by statisticians for statisticians, which so they'll always have their place, but there were just so many people who had to do forecasting, were intimidated by these tools, so I just wanted to make something that got them 98% of the way, but with complete simplicity. So much could be automated and simplified in the process. So yeah, that's what Echo Excel tries to do.
What are your thoughts, Oz?
Oh, I'm curious about how do you get from chaotic to meaning that people use Excel a lot?
Um, well, because a lot of these companies would have you know, multi-million-dollar streamlined software. I think one reason why Excel is still just so popular among users and not as much so among planners and managers is because people overrate or they underestimate the need for flexibility. All these businesses have little quirks that they need to constantly adapt to. The speed of business is getting faster, so Excel's actually becoming more relevant. And yeah, so that's supply chain especially is like that.
What's an example of how something could change fast in supply chain?
Right. So, for example, I worked for a company called ESOP, which is a cosmetics retail company. I had to forecast all their sales and make sure all of their inventory, all their stock was in the right locations across the world. And each of those countries had their own little, their own quirks. They'd need inventory that didn't relate to sales. They'd have some big event to plan, and I would have to, you know, software that's just rigid wouldn't cater to that. So I and you know, many others, they just have to try to build similar software with Excel. But I've just been amazed there isn't really much out there with Excel forecasting tools in general. So I'm just trying to fill that void a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So, so
Go ahead, Jordan.
when you built your tool, I know we had talked.
you had a version that has no VBA in it, and I think you also, and I could be wrong on this, you have a version that does have a VBA. So the no VBA is kind of like a thin client. It's more lightweight. Can you speak to, what advantages are there to taking VBA out of it, and did you even want to?
Sure.
Or were you forced into it?
Well, actually, the first version I sent to you, I'm not sure if it even worked. Just a beta version. That was VBA. So I initially started all Visual Basic. I went crazy I tried to make it work like an application. As soon as you launched the workbook, all of the ribbons would automatically hide, stuff like that. But I just found that when when I sent it to people, they would have niggling problems setting it up. It would, you send it to a friend in a consulting company, and it wouldn't get through the firewall, and you just couldn't use it. And if you're sending it to friends, it's okay, but if you're sending it to customers, they're going to get impatient and give up. So I wanted to make something completely stable, and I also just like the fact if you work with the constraints, if you try to use little VBA to start with, so if you're making a template yourself, perhaps make the goal to use no VBA because what's embedded in Excel won't break. Then I think that's a good place to start. So I started with Echo Lite. I will be making a more advanced Pro VBA version for for organizations, but that will that definitely needs VBA. That's much more heavy duty.
So,
Yeah. Go ahead, Oz.
No, it was Jordan.
That was me. So, because the thing is, I used to love VBA, and I still love VBA, but all my solutions were very VBA heavy. And then over time, as I learned more formula tricks, I've sort of come to it's not that I dislike VBA, it's that I almost feel like it's overused. So in a certain sense, less is more. I found that you could do a lot with formulas that was very speedy and very efficient, and you didn't have to hit a run button. And people probably don't know this, but I hate having to hit a run button. So I really liked having formulas, and I know they're sometimes harder for folks to understand, whereas VBA is very linear. You can go in and look it up, and you can add comments. But I really feel like the future for me in development, and I hope for the future for a lot of other developers, is really more towards doing as much in Excel and the formulas, like you said, you can't break the functions that have already been tested, because I think it makes a lot lighter weight clients. I know that's like a really computery term, but it really makes a lighter and tighter Excel application.
Well,
anyone agree with me? Anyone going to disagree?
I will add, and this is something that a blog post I wrote a long time ago. 6 reading in, some people got on my case, and I was really saying be careful. And one point I was making was, even if you've got some big, nasty, complicated formula, you're more likely to find somebody who can help you figure it out. But if you have to go off into VBA, you're going to have a tougher time with somebody figuring that out. And when you get into writing code, a person may be more likely to say, I don't even want to figure this out. Let's start from scratch, delete this, and I'll write code the way I write code, rather than trying to get in somebody else's head. So formulas are really good for those reasons, and I try to stick with formulas myself.
I see some irony in this, though, Jordan. I think this would be probably Bill Jellen's favorite day, that a guy who owns the website Option Explicit VBA thinks, quote, VBA is over.
I know. I know. Well, I've evolved. Fair enough. I can't argue with that.
Well, we have to be have room for evolving, or else you wind up playing gotcha like politicians, and some 60-year-old guy is answering for something he did when he was 19. That's gotcha politics.
He's got more information now. So next question for you. Could you discuss a little bit? As I looked at your product, you use quite a few forecasting methods in there. Would you mind discussing those and how you integrated those into Excel?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so there's four forecasting formulas, but the main, or the most important one is called Holt-Winters forecasting, which I think Jordan's familiar with, and um, it's basically it's otherwise called triple exponential smoothing. So you have to run all these formulas in the background. You can't you hide them away from the end user. Because it really does become pretty complex. You've got different rows to try to forecast. You're basically separately forecasting your trend and seasonality, and what's called alpha or level of a forecast, and behind that, it's a little bit hard to explain, but you've got all these variables that basically determine how far back that forecast will look, whether it looks at gives more weight to the last few months or the last few years. So how I did that is I just did everything in a processing sheet, and you can go to VBA even if you're not enabling macros, and I think there's a properties section. You can go to very hidden and completely hide the sheet, so people are none the wiser. I find things just less breakable if you just hide them away like that. And yeah, so it just took a lot of headache and trial and error, but I integrated them eventually.
That's great. And then you did talk a little bit earlier about part of the development process, right? And that
Sure.
part was, okay, I built things in VBA, and then I sent it to people, and I realized, wow, that was a problem. And so, and John Peltier talked about this quite a bit, where first you build something for yourself, and then you build something for your friends, and there's a growth in that. And then, as you send it out to other people, you run into kind of a further level of development. Could you talk about the steps that led up to that? As you're a person, sitting in a room somewhere, and you decide, you know what, I'm going to build something, and I'm going to try to create this product. What did that development kind of process look like for you? For the benefit of our viewers who may want to develop Excel applications themselves, what did you go through?
Yeah.
What did you find successful?
Yeah, sure. Well, probably like most of your viewers, I built applications for myself and close colleagues. Like you say, that's just completely different when you have to build it at scale for people that you don't know. Then you can't hold their hand through using the template or whatever it is you're building. So the difference is you really have to think about user interface design or user experience, they sometimes call it, and yeah, you've got to imagine what the lazy, impatient user is going to think, almost like when you're writing an article or something. People using something for the first time, they just want it to not be annoying and do what they expect it to do. So you need to simplify. You need to, like, I added so many features, and then I had to keep asking myself, is the benefit of this feature really worth the extra weight, the extra complexity it adds to the interface? And
what's an example?
often I had to trash so many ideas, or so many features that I'd spent 2 days building. So I think that's sorry.
So what's an example of something you had to think about? Is this really worth having, though it's a good idea?
Sure. So I initially built it with more tabs, and would allow the user to control everything. Control if they wanted to put in their own custom seasonality. They wanted more weight given to last Christmas, December's sales or something. They could do that. But it was really, the benefit of doing that was just so small versus the learning curve that you're introducing to the user. It's quite confusing to initially look at. So I just thought, you know what, even though I'm attached to this, I put my sweat into it. I have to be honest with myself and just scrap it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oz, you have a question?
No,
Actually, I
go
have
ahead.
a question. So just for our viewers, Nick, if you would, because when we're talking forecasting for our less statistically minded viewers, so we're not just talking like a weather forecast. Can you just give a little information in your world what a forecast is, and so people will know what you can use the tool for?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so there's two kinds of forecasts, at least in business, or demand forecasting. Finance people, engineers will have to forecast to predict the sales of a product, say, and it's often the main one I'm referring to is historical forecasting, because you're looking back at historical the trends and the seasonal flows. So a typical consumer product would have this consistent trend of being popular and selling a lot in Christmas, then diving in January, and basically, rather than relying on people's guesswork, you can use statistics to more rationally try to detect those things and stretch the data or extrapolate the data into the future.
Gotcha.
Does that explain? Does that answer your question? So it can be hard to explain.
Right. No, I know. No, I think that answers our question. It's you're using historical data to make guesses about the future, and I guess the different methods you have in your tool is trying to account for let's say there's trends at certain points or season. There's certain cycles that happen. So it's looking at the past and saying, well, if we know what the past looks like and we know where it's going, we can get a pretty good guess about the future.
Sure, and it is guessing, as you say, but it's trying to come up with the best or the least worst guess. Yeah.